Everybody, good evening. Thank you for coming, and this should be a very fun night. I just want to make sure I say some thank yous to the Doylestown Historical Society, the board, and the volunteers that donated their time and their expertise to pull this event off. So thank you. And before you go, do take a look at our table. There's a lot of events we have coming up, and we hope to see you there as well. Tonight we're going to be, Tim Stack is going to be talking. He's a Doylestown native, and I'll just get right to it. Tim Stack was raised in Doylestown starting in 1955. He left for a career in the entertainment business in 1979 and joined the famous improvisational Los Angeles comedy troupe, the Groundlings, in 1980. The Groundlings is celebrating its 50th year, and his brother Pat was also a member of that group. He also met his wife of 34 years, Jano, at the Groundlings, and they have 2 children, Murphy, Tim's mother, Jones' maiden name, and Doyle, named for Doylestown. He and Jano have lived in Santa Barbara, California since 1991. Tim has 87 credits as an actor in movies and TV, and close to 30 credits as a writer and producer. Some of his acting credits include Parker Lewis Can't Lose, Seinfeld, The Golden Girls, as well as co-creating his own shows, Nightstand with Dick Dietrick, and the Howard Stern-produced Son of the Beach. Tim's career continues to this day, so please join me in welcoming Tim Stack.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Hi. Thank you for being here. I'm going to see if this thing works. I'm horrible with technology, so let's see if this works. Anyway, I'm really thrilled to be here. Big fan of Doylestown Historical Society. I watch all the videos. And thank you to you folks, especially Tom, the tech guy who put all this together. But I watch the videos, and I like the one with Mike Pettin and Walter Connie, who I'm going to talk about a bunch. And then I watched the one with Michael Smerconish, and it was really great. And then I listened to his podcast, where he drove around Doylestown and just sort of shouted out his memories. And I was really jealous and really super impressed. And I thought, I kind of like to do that. Then I had a big birthday recently. I turned 50. I know, I look great. I admit I had some work done. The doctor said, really, Tim, you want chins? I said, yeah. That's the look. But I just thought, one of those things after that birthday, and I said to my wife, I said, I kind of like to go back and do that. And she said, you absolutely do that. So I thought I'd come back and tell funny memories and my funny memories and stories about growing up in Doylestown, which I absolutely love. Named my son Doyle. So, because Doylestown back then, like, for example, the store Musselman's was the big department store where a woman could buy a dress and a boy could buy his scout uniform in the same place. And across the street was Rudolph's, where a kid could buy high black Chuck Taylors and a survivalist could buy a tent. Same store. And I don't know, just growing up there, I feel like I kind of owe Doylestown. So I want to come back and do this. I hopefully don't go too long. I did cut the musical number. Sent the accordion player home. That's going to save an hour. Anyway, I'm going to jump around a lot here tonight, different aspects and stuff. And again, this involves technology. So I thought I would start with why the Stacks moved to Doylestown. Let's see if this works. Yes, it does. It was Ed's Diner. So, unfortunately, none of my family can be here tonight. But my brother Pat and I agree that if we were ever on death row, and there's still time, our last meal would be a cheeseburger and fries from Ed's Diner. We just love that place. But the reason it's Ed's Diner is my dad was working in Washington, D.C., and my mom was living, they were dating, and she was living in Stamford, Connecticut. Now, at the time, he was 29 and she was 18, but I don't want to talk about that. The voices will start. But anyway, he would stop at Ed's Diner. And he would look around Doylestown and say, this would be an amazing place for a family to grow up. And that was part of that was the big reason. The other reason was, there was a couple, Tom and Claire Scott. Claire Scott just passed away. She was 104. And they had all lived together in Elkins Park. And the Scotts moved to Doylestown. So that was sort of the reason. But I wanted to share an Ed's Diner memory. This is only the kind of like slightly blue thing I'm going to tell tonight. Slightly blue. So back then, Ed's Diner in the 60s, Ed's Diner was the only place a guy could buy a condom. That's absolutely true, because you couldn't walk into Halen's drugstore and say, hi, Dr. Halen, could I get a bottle of Jade East and some condoms? Like, that didn't happen. But at Ed's Diner, if like teenage boys like us were sitting at a counter and a guy walks into the bathroom and he's out in 15 seconds, it's like, oh yeah. We know why that guy went to Ed's Diner. My brother and I, they also worked as heavy-duty water balloons. So that's where, so anyway, let's keep this thing going. So our first house was on North Clinton Street, which I think my father bought for $12,000. And let's see a picture of that. Now that's me and Mrs. Klein's here. Where is she? Right there. That's me and my next door neighbor, my first best friend, Susie Klein. I know we look like two kids from Appalachia. Like the banjo player from Deliverance should be in the background. But it was a really nice house, and the Kleins were so nice and so great. They lived next door. He worked at Klein Pontiac. This is going back now in the 50s, and he would drive a different Pontiac home every night. So my brother and I would just be like, what Pontiac is coming home tonight? And sure enough, a new one would pull in. And this is the first thing I want to sort of talk about my folks. They were kind of hip and different for Doylestown. And my dad, in 1960, drove a Peugeot, which was just unheard of. And then he went on then after that, he bought two Checkers. And finally, in the late 60s, he bought a Ford. So we were kind of hip and different for Doylestown. We weren't, my parents were. They owned Peugeots. They were from New York, and we were Democrats. That was not a big thing back then in Doylestown. So then after that, we moved to, where's that bottle of water? We moved to Creek Drive, which was right behind Linden Elementary. And let me show a picture of that. It's not a great picture of the house, but I want to explain it. So that's my brother Pat. Some people are friends of Pat. They're here tonight. My sister Nina, and that's me on the right. And Pat's wearing a Fannie Chapman sweatshirt, which at the time meant he made the swim team. That was a big deal. I never made the swim team. But the other thing I wanted to point out about that house, again, my parents kind of hip and different. The house was built with Nantucket shingles, which was really unique. Nobody in Doylestown had Nantucket shingles. In fact, kids would say to me like, Tim, what is your house made of? And I would say, idiot, Nantucket shingles. Everybody knows Nantucket shingles. And I had no idea what Nantucket shingles were. It could have been a building material. It could have been a virus. Like a virus in red pants, Nantucket shingles. So that was, okay, and I did want to mention this too. Speaking of diseases, another great Doylestown memory is, and people might have had him as a doctor, Dr. Sam Willard was our doctor. Dr. Sam Willard was famous for smoking at least 3 Pall Malls for every patient that came into the office. So if you had an afternoon appointment, his ashtray looked like Nagasaki by the end of the day. But he was our doctor. But here's a little interesting Doylestown Historical Society fact. Dr. Sam Willard was the doctor for the draft board during the Vietnam War. So if you had to fake an injury to get out of going to Vietnam, you had to go through Dr. Sam Willard. Now, my brother Pat literally had a bad back. He got a 2F classification, which meant he could go, but he couldn't be in combat. So my mother was very happy, and she bought Dr. Willard a carton of Pall Malls. That's a true story. But Creek Drive was an incredible place to grow up, as there are Taylor kids here tonight. It was just a wonderful, wonderful place. The Stacks were there, and Clem Taylor, who I'm going to talk about later, and Dan Taylor, who's also left, with Brian Deirdre. They're here. The Bitzers, the Lloyds, the Roars, the Coffins, the Junkins, maybe you know these names. It was just an incredible place. And part of it was we just did crazy stuff all the time. We just had projects going all the time. And I found this picture. So that is Clem Taylor on the left, Jim Coffin bending over. That's Brian Taylor behind the wheel of a go-kart that we made out of boards and a baby carriage. And that's the kind of stuff we did in Doylestown then. And funny thing about Brian, who's here, is Brian would try anything. Like we could say, Brian, we built a go-kart. You're probably going to die. Will you drive this thing? Yeah, sure, I'll do it. That's fine. Brian, will you go steal some booze from your mom and put it in a Skippy jar? Yeah, sure, I'll do it. Yeah, I'll get it. I'll take care of that. And it's true. So here's another picture. Pat's friends will get a kick out of this one. This was, Clem and I painted this car. This car, Pat and his friend Blair McCaw drove to Woodstock. And they got within 5 miles of Woodstock, was it 5? Maybe it was more. And they had heard reports coming back like it's a mess. So they were like, let's go to New York City. We can drink there. We'll turn around and go around. So that's a whole other story, my brother not going to Woodstock. But that was the kind of stuff. We just painted the car and we had fun. And anyway, more activities like that. But that's the thing about Doylestown then is, and everybody knows this, is every neighborhood had these activities, whether you lived on Homestead or Maplewood or Mercer, wherever you lived, you sort of came home from school and ran into the neighborhood and just played. And that's what you did till dinner was ready, and then you came home. And it was really a wonderful experience. Then we moved uptown. We moved to Court Street, beautiful house. I drove by there today. It's a great old Victorian house. Now, this picture taken, that's me on the left with really good hair. That's Clem. That's a kid named Rob Raup. And that's Brian Taylor again. Sure, I'll climb on the roof. Yeah, not a problem. You go first, Brian. Yeah, okay, I got it. But down below, what you don't see is my parents used to have a kind of a famous Memorial Day party. And it was drunken adults at 10:30 in the morning while the parade went, while Shriners went by and all this, just yelling and screaming. And we were on the roof. We were sort of having our own party. I want to show you this picture. It's a little closer. Now you can see that picture. We're really high in that picture. We're really high on bad 70s weed right there. Not the good weed like today. That's the kind of weed you bought from a sketchy guy in the parking lot at Mrs. Paul's. That kind of weed. I do want to say something about Mrs. Paul's. How lucky we were to live so close to Mrs. Paul's, where we got the really fresh frozen fish. And I'm always convinced Mrs. Paul's, they caught the fish at the Burrow Dam, froze it, and then sent it to market. Big treat, though, about Mrs. Paul's, if Catholic kid, Friday night fish sticks and a football game, nothing better than Mrs. Paul's fish sticks, and made my parents their life easier. Speaking of my parents, I want to talk about the family a little bit. My dad, because my parents especially, they were kind of, very integral parts of Doylestown, especially my mom, which I'll get to, but I'll start with my dad. Here's a picture of my dad. There he is there. You wonder where I got the idea for Sun on the Beach from. My dad, but he was a really funny guy and a writer in his heart, and had a great business. Stack Sales was a really good business. Office supplies, you know, before Staples, and he had an office on Oakland Avenue, or first on West State Street and then on Oakland Avenue. And he was great. He always let us stay up late to watch movies that he liked. So, which was fine. And so to this day, I still watch movies from the 30s and 40s all the time. And that was because of my dad. And then my mom was really kind of a Doylestown icon. I can brag about her. Joan Stack, right there, the Joan Stack Show was a radio show that she had on WBUX for like 30 years. Now that picture's taken at her table at Connie's Cross Keys Inn. And she would have different guests 5 days a week. Different guests on every day. And she really just made a world out of it. She used to call up cruises and say, well, this is Joan Stack from the Joan Stack Show, and I'd like to sample your cruise. And it was like, okay. They didn't know it was in Doylestown. But the show it started out as just a cooking show, like 5 minutes a day. And she convinced Walter Connie, who was one of the owners of WBUX with James Mister and Don Meredith and a bunch of other guys. And she convinced him, like, can I do a food show? I was like, yeah, sure, why not? 5 minutes. And she didn't charge anything. So then that worked out pretty well. And she was obsessed with Arlene Francis, who used to be on What's My Line? You remember, like, are you currently appearing on the Broadway stage? But Arlene Francis had a radio show from Sardi's in New York, and my mother loved that, so she went to Walter Connie again and said, hey, can I do a radio show from the restaurant? It was like, great idea. It was free publicity for the restaurant, and it worked, and she literally 30 years, close to 30 years, I think. Joe can confirm that. And it was my dad's idea, because he used to go to Rotary at Connie's on Wednesday nights, and anyway, that's how that sort of thing. But I will say my mom, she's really fun. She had a normal voice, but when she would get on the air, she would say every word as if it is a novel unto itself. And she would add syllables, like self became 2 syllables. I don't know where she came up with that, but I used to do her as a character of the Groundlings, and she loved that. Anyway, and my parents were both kind of liberal, which was a little weird at the time, but in fact, my dad once got in an editorial war with Michael Smerconish, because he was very liberal and Michael was conservative. And then my sister finally said, Dad, you're in this war on the line in the Intelligencer. That kid's 12 years old. Well, he's really smart, I'll say that. So let's see who is next. Who's next? Oh, that's my mom. That's the actor Eli Wallach. She would have really great guests on one day. And they weren't great, but like she'd have famous guests, and the next day she'd have like the fire chief at the Plumsteadville Fire Station talking about the pancake breakfast. It was the one, and she gave each one as much energy, and it was really, she was really something. Who's next here? Oh, that's a big thing about my parents, were they kind of had 2 sets of friends. Like they were, like my dad was Doylestown Country Club, but they were also Town and Country Players in Buckingham, and they were sort of both our homes. So I really thank them, because I got exposed to 2 worlds, and Town and Country Players was a big deal in my life. And again, I just thank them. They were fun and different. There's my brother Pat. Some people, that's a Doylestown Historical Society picture. Great older brother, funniest guy I know. Other people can testify to that. And neither one of us were sort of ever afraid of an audience. That's us showing off, putting on costumes. That's sort of all we did, and then made a living out of it. Pat had a great comedy career himself. He was once partners with Nathan Lane, Stack and Lane. They had a good run. Then he produced some movies, and then he went to work for a company called Yahoo, and then got out early, so good for him. But he's produced some movies too, and his kids, Winnie and Emma, are both actors. One's in the Groundlings now, one's in Second City in New York, and my son works in advertising and sales. My daughter works in reality TV. So the whole kind of like arts thing just sort of happened. Now I want to start talking about sort of the third Stack brother. Oh, that's my sister Nina. God. She'd be so mad that I skipped her. I'm so sorry. That's another story. She's unbelievable that she grew up with the two of us, because this picture kind of says it all. Oh, that's her looking at my brother. Look at the way she's looking at him, and I can't see if it's like, is she looking at him like, I love you or I hate you? Like either one, or maybe both. There's Clem Taylor. He was sort of the third Stack brother. Clem went on to have an incredible career in news and journalism. He won a Peabody Award for 60 Minutes, worked at ABC News for years, and just kind of a self-driven kid who always knew he wanted to be in news. And I'm going to tell a story about him later as the night goes on. But he had a relationship with everybody in our family, and at the same time would talk to my parents like about the Tet Offensive. Clem, what are you talking about? So let's move into education. This is my first school here. This was the American Legion. I guess it's still there, right? Okay, so that was an interesting place to go to school because you were surrounded by Nazi flags and Japanese bayonets. We're 5-year-olds running around, there's Nazis. And I had met Clem in the summer of '59, and then he went, but he was in the 6-year-old class. And for some reason, it was like South Africa, like, do not cross the line to the 6-year-olds. Like, it was apartheid right there, and which was kind of weird. So Clem and I would just sort of wave at each other, and then I caught up with him the next year in first grade. But I did want to show a clip. Here's a clip. You can't really see the pictures, but that's that's the kindergarten class, 1959 and 60 at the American Legion School. And then right there is one of my classmates, Joe Conti, who's here tonight. And his hair is still great. God. But Joe would have been my third friend, I think, if I had met Clem the summer before, and we hung a lot. And then later I worked as a busboy, I'm going to talk about, with Joe and for his dad. I'll talk about that later. And Joe's going to come up and tell a story that's, it's better from his point of view about how bad I was. So then I went to the Borough School. Anybody ever went to the Borough School? I was on the 2nd floor while the 3rd floor was condemned. That's the truth. And so my mom, like every time my mom would hear the sirens going, the fire engine sirens going, she would call the Melinda Cox Library. And she would say, hello, I have a question for you. And they would say, can you lower your voice? It's a library. Stupid joke, sorry. She'd say, excuse me, is there a fire going on across the street? And they'd say no. And eventually the place did burn down. It did. I mean, and I remember that day. I saw like friends of my kids' dads up on ladders trying to put it out. And I was kind of like, no, let it go. So then this was my first grade class up there at the Borough School, and Clem's in there. And you'll see the teacher, Mrs. McEntee. This sort of began my making trouble in school. Most of us who went to school together, you know what I'm talking about. Big on getting laughs in class. Never at home, big in school. And Mrs. McEntee, this is sort of why it started. So Clem and I declared war on Mrs. McEntee at 6 years old. So the first day of school, my dad walks me in the classroom and leaves me there. And as he starts to go, he introduces me, this is Mrs. McEntee, and I see Mrs. McEntee kind of look like this and wait till my dad's gone, and she said, I have a question for you. Why aren't you in the Catholic school? I said, what? She said, why aren't you in the Catholic school? I said, I'm 6. I wasn't consulted. But again, I could do a whole night on that. And then I went to Linden Elementary, did my first school play, Macbeth, but I got laughs because I guess I was really bad. Laughs were good. So and then I went to Lenape Junior High School with some of you. I had a teacher, Mr. Mitchner. Some of you might remember Mr. Mitchner, Mr. Mitch, who once told me that my mother was a communist because we got the New York Times. Back in those days, you could say stuff like that. It's like you didn't think of it. And he did send me to the office once, not for being a commie, but for farting. And then Mr. Wetzel, the vice principal, who was formerly the shop teacher, he made you build a paddle that you knew he was going to hit you with. So as you're lathing this thing, you know it's going to be hitting you in a matter of moments. Anyway, then I went to Central Bucks East. I think there's a picture here. Yeah, so this is me and Clem at Central Bucks East the first year it opened. Apparently we were really into bronzing back then. I don't know what's going on that day. But Central Bucks East the first year, and they had TVs in every classroom. That was unheard of at the time. So Clem and I would get on TV, and I would do the sports, and he would write the copy. And again, that was a great year. Then I went to, I finished at Germantown Academy because my brother Pat had gone there, did really well in sports. They thought I would do the same thing, and boy, did I fool them. But I made great friends still to this day. And one of my friends there, his dad, is sort of how my first opening to Hollywood. I took it, it was a really small connection, but I took it. Then I went to Boston College. That's Jan Goldman, who was in our nursery school class, who went to Boston College with. And the Goldman family is a big family here in Doylestown, a lot of history there. So I thought I would show that. So the thing about Doylestown was, for me back then, it was imagination. Like, there was nothing to do, but there was everything to do. And you sort of had to create your own fun. And that's what we did. So my favorite place for my imagination was the County Theater. So, which was really like my home away from home. Just, you know, it was a place to go to the movies. And some of you will remember back then, there were Saturday matinees. And for 50 cents, my mom would give me 50 cents. You got into the Saturday matinees, saw a double feature. You got a box of popcorn and a soda. And of course, you ate the popcorn as quickly as you can so you could throw the box at the screen. I'm always convinced the popcorn industry got together and made it from boxes to bags because of us. That was the reason. But the thing about the County Theater was, there was an usher there. You may know this guy. He might be here. I don't think he's here. But his name was John Woods. He was sort of the head usher. And he would let me and Clem in for free. It's like a Tom Sawyer move. You come in for free, but you have to sweep up the theater afterwards. So we would do that all the time, and it worked out great. We'd come back to the movie the next week, and we always got in. And that sort of leads me to my next thing, which is the Doylestown work ethic. Like, everybody had jobs back then. I don't know, maybe they do now, but it just seemed like if you were a kid in Doylestown, you had a job. You just picked up lawn work, whatever it was, you had a job. And the big job for a lot of the boys, some of whom are here tonight, was caddying. Caddying at Doylestown Country Club was a really big thing. And the story I want to tell about caddying is, back then, the first guy who showed up at the caddy shack, excuse me, got to go out the first, got to go out the earliest. But if you were Catholic and you had to go to 7 o'clock Mass, you're not going to get there till 8:15. My father was more interested in commerce than he was faith. And he said, go up, get communion, and then just keep on going. So that's what we would do. You go up, you get communion, and then we would keep on walking. But we were always last in line because we knew this was going to happen. We just wanted to keep walking out. And also we wanted to tease our friends. Because the other kids there who were caddies, you're supposed to take communion, go back, you kneel down, you pray, you get your hands like this. But as we would walk by, it was just this. These guys are praying and giving us the finger at the same time because we were going to go out before them. Thank you, Dad. But, so the first, I think this is right. Oh, so this is funny. So again, everybody had jobs. Clem and I started a business called S&T Lawn Removal Service Now, there's our old phone numbers, and look at this. This is how we spelled specialist. I think the only reason we got jobs, people felt sorry for us. Oh, those kids, yeah. A little slow. But again, everybody had jobs. Now, what picture is next? Am I giving away anything? Oh, okay. Conti's. There's Walter Conti, Conti's Cross Keys Inn, which was my first job where it was like you got a paycheck. And it was a legit job. It wasn't caddying. Caddying was like goofy time. And cleaning up leaves with Clem was goofy time. But Walter Conti, oh, I missed something. I want to go back. Did I miss something? Yes. I'm sorry. We'll leave Walter up there for a second. I want to go back and tell this story because it's my kid's favorite story. So again, everybody has jobs. So this is the only tiny bit disgusting. So we used to shovel snow in the winter. In the first job, my dad had a store on State Street. We'd go there, we'd shovel the parking lot. Next door was a store called the Bambi Shop that a guy named Jim Wells owned. We would shovel that across the street. There was Ann Stanley, we would shovel that. And then we'd work our way back towards Creek Drive along Linden Avenue. We see this house, it's a lot of snow out front. We just say, hey, let's knock on the door. Let's ding, ding, ding. My kids have the same sense of humor. So we knock on the door, and it's the middle of winter, and this woman, older woman, clearly had a cold because she opens the door, and she had, I'm just gonna say it, she had a pretty large snot bubble coming out of her nose. Except usually those things are one and done, like exhale, it goes. This thing wouldn't die. It kept going in and out. And she said, can I help you? We couldn't talk because we're watching a science fiction movie right here. Finally, the thing popped. Can we shovel your sidewalk? $3, we got paid, and anyway. So then my dad got me a job working at Conti's Cross Keys Inn. And it was my first sort of legit job. I will say this, I have only been fired twice in my life. Once by Walter Conti, and once by Charlie Sheen. That's absolutely true. One was a sex-addicted cokehead. The other one was Charlie Sheen. No, I'm kidding. Walter Conti was so good to me and my mom. Anyway, I want Joe to come up and tell the story. Do we have that microphone, Tom? Is it? You don't mean a mic? Or you can talk from there if you want.
Actually, I will say Judge Ludwig came to me in '95 and said, I'd like to start the Doylestown Historical Society. It's a great idea. Look at this. This is really wonderful. Tim Stack's family was zany. So I really started on the Creek Drive part of the story that you heard. And if I may just tell the one story about your mom, and then I'll tell the
Yeah.
I got very close to Joan Stack because as the boss's son, I worked with her every day. Also, if a guest didn't show up, I would sit down and be her guest. And as Tim nicely remembered, I had a little public service career, and frankly, it was quite helpful to be on the Joan Stack show as a township supervisor and then as a state rep. It was wonderful. Every time I was on, and this was dozens of times I was on, I would tell the story that the first overnight I spent as a child during the kindergarten years, I think I was 4 years old, I spent the night at the Stack House. And Mrs. Joan Stack was the first woman, other than my mother, to kiss me goodnight. And I would tell that story every time I was on the show. And Joan Stack would go, oh, Joey, do you have to tell that story every time you're on? Only three people call me Joey, my mother, Flo Smirkanish, and Joan Stack. They're the only three I have for Joe. So the story about Tim is a busboy. Tim had an interesting work ethic. He was a little lethargic. And my father, who was larger than life, was also a very tough boss. And Tim had this wonderful ability to, it was water the glasses, bread and butter, clean the ashtrays. That's what a busboy did, and reset the tables. Tim would kind of lope along, be standing back in the kitchen, not doing too much. Then he'd see my father, boom, he'd spring in the back. Boom, boom, all over the place. So one night, as the boss's son, of course, on the Metrodea, the colonial dining room, the old original room in the back, I see there's some gray hair here, you may remember it. And I'm pouring a bottle of wine. And I'm facing, the entrance to the dining room is back here. I hear, boom! I've never heard a thud like that since then. I will never hear a thud like that ever again in my life. I turn around. In the dining room, as busboys, you had to have bread and butter plates with pats of butter on them, bread baskets with crackers, cut Italian bread. And if you carry them right, you could have about 8 or 10 butter chips and a couple bread baskets. I turn around after I hear the boom. Here comes all the bread and butter plates and the crackers flying into the room, all over a table of 6. All over a table of 6. But as I said, the zany Marx Brothers type stack stories, or a Peter Sellers movie, immediately followed by Tim in a horizontal position, coming into the dining room like this. So what happened, you're wondering? He's all loaded up. He sees my father. He springs into action, throws it into high gear, and forgot about the one step into the dining room. Boom! We were picking the butter pats off of ladies' hair. It was the funniest scene. Of all the movies I mentioned, the Marx Brothers, Peter Sellers, it was the funniest scene I've ever seen in my life.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. So, let me see what's next here. I think, is this next? Okay. So I want to tell a story. I'm going to wrap it up tonight with a story back to Clem Taylor. And I told this at his memorial. It's a Doylestown historical moment that it's a true story, and it still kills me to this day. So this picture was taken, I think in like early November 1969. So what happened was we were riding the bus home from Central Bucks East, and Clem said to me, "Hey, do you want to go up to the courthouse today? The Mary Maiman trial is starting today." Now, I said, "Clem, who's Mary Maiman?" Clem explains, this is Mary Maiman, who was a horrible, horrible person, who was on trial for murder at the Doylestown courthouse. So, and if you don't remember this case, she was a crazy woman. She lived in Levittown, where all the houses look alike. And apparently her son's girlfriend broke up with him because of what the mom told her. So Mary said, "I'll fix that. I'm going to go kill her." But in Levittown, she goes to the wrong house and kills the wrong people. Horrible story, okay? That's the prep. Clem says, "Hey, you want to go?" Why would I want to go to Mary Maiman's trial? Well, then he said, "Well, there are going to be TV cameras there. Count me in." So we ride our bikes up to the courthouse, and as we arrive, we see the truck from KYW. The whole thing about this story is, this was the day that Clem Taylor sort of launched both our careers. So we ride up and we see the truck from KYW, and there's a reporter, you may remember this guy, Malcolm Poindexter. Clem knew like every piece he had ever done, and he starts talking to him. And of course, as he's saying, like, "I love this piece," and I keep leaning in, "Hey, can we be on TV?" Malcolm Poindexter's almost like, "Who's this guy?" So then we end up going into the courthouse. And who is the courthouse guard but John Woods, who was the usher at the county theater? Not only does he take us in the courtroom, he puts us in the front row, and Mary Maiman is 2 feet from us. I could tap her on the shoulder and say, hey, Mary, what's going on? We're both petrified. The trial starts, the DA comes on, who we know from caddying, it's Ward Clark, who was the DA then. He starts, and all of a sudden he looks at us and he goes, hold on. He's about to show the crime scene photos. And he sees us and he goes, hold on, Your Honor, for 1 second. There are 2 youngsters here in the audience, and they shouldn't be here, and they shouldn't see these photos. And with that, I swear to God, Mary Maiman turns around, and you don't see like warts and hairs and teeth and horrible breath. She goes like this, what are you 2 doing here? Clem and I scream simultaneously, ah! And we run out so fast. Remember when the Three Stooges would run through a wall and leave a silhouette of themselves? That's how fast we ran. So we run outside, and Malcolm Poindexter's still there, and they're shooting things, but they don't really have a story. And Clem says to them, you know, Mary Maiman's son is probably going to be leaving from that door sort of on Broad Street. You may want to move the cameras down there. Oh, good idea. So they move the cameras down, and sure enough, they get the shot of Mary Maiman's son leaving the courthouse. And they're like, oh, thank you so much. I take it, hey, can we be on TV? And they say, okay, fine. So just stand there and act like you're looking at Mary Maiman leave the courthouse. So we go, they put the camera on us, and we go like this. So cut to that night. We're watching the 11 o'clock news. Vince Leonard says, like, and now we take you to Bucks County, the courthouse for the first day of the Mary Maiman trial. And you hear Malcolm Poindexter say, security was tight at Bucks County Courthouse, and the shot is of me and Clem. That was his first news job, and my first tea time on TV was the Mary Maiman trial. So there's an epilogue to this story. So about 6 years ago, I don't know, I was thinking about it, and I wrote KYW, and they said, well, we sent all that footage to Temple University. So and this is over a course of a couple of months. In Temple University, I write them and I say, yeah, I mean, you'd have to come down to the library and go through everything, but there might be the footage there. So I was home and I drive down to Temple University and I go to their video library, and the guy was super helpful. And I'm looking, it's one of those crank things where you're a viewfinder, where you're looking, or it's like this, sorry. I'm not in Australia, sorry. So I'm going like this and I'm looking and the film's coming through, and all of a sudden, this is after like 2 hours. Oh my God, it's the raw footage from the Mary Maiman story. So, what I want to do next is, okay, so the first part is the actual raw footage from the story. And again, there was tons of raw footage, but I left a little part in here because there's some good shots of Doylestown, but I really want you to see the last part. Okay, I can tell the story with that shot. Unfortunately, there's some fun shots of Doylestown. So we do this, and he said to me, like, Mary Maiman is there. And for whatever reason, I thought it would be really good acting if I stuck my tongue out. So I go like this. This is what I do. Like that was really dramatic. So anyway, it was just a wonderful memory. And the other thing I love about too is Clem wore a tie. Like that's how dedicated he was going to work that day. Like maybe I can get a scoop, and sure enough, he wore a tie. Anyway, that's it. I just wanted to end on that story. Thank you so much for being here. Sure, absolutely.
Okay, well here, I'll give you this, and...
What do I do with
I'm
it?
sorry, actually you have it. Take some questions.
Okay, if anybody has any questions. Anything, and showbiz stuff, if you want to ask, that's fine. Now, I didn't want to do a historical society talking about my day on Quincy.
Why did Charlie fire you?
That's kind of an interesting story. It's a bit of a long story. I can tell you this, I got a text like at 4 in the morning. I'll tell you this part. I got hired, do you remember when he did a tour? Like he went on tour? So I got hired to write it. And everything was going great. And then some friend, his house was so crazy. Like sometimes you work really long hours in show business. And I was there, it was like 3 in the morning. And the doorbell rang, and the doorbell opens. Why, it's Jose Canseco and Paula Abdul. What are they? It's 3 in the morning. What are you doing here? That's how sort of crazy the house was. And I'm not saying, he would tell you that, first off. Like but he's a nice person. He's just sort of crazy. So somehow, believe it or not, it was Lenny Dykstra, the baseball player, and they were big buddies. And he showed up, and Charlie was rehearsing something that I had written. I thought it was funny. I sent out a list to all these friends of mine, send in jokes, and they were funny jokes. And Charlie was doing it, and Lenny Dykstra showed up, and he looked like he had an LA Country Club shirt on and khakis and boots and a kind of a safari hat. And I thought to myself, why is a greenskeeper from LA Country Club? And then I looked and went, oh my God, that's Lenny Dykstra. And I went, oh, hi, Lenny, big fan. And he smiles, he goes, thanks, he's got no teeth. And he goes, oh, thanks a lot. It's like, okay. So somehow Lenny told Charlie it wasn't funny. So then about 4 in the morning, I was staying at a motel in LA, and I get a text. And it basically said, hey, hold off on coming in on Monday. I want to think this thing over. And I knew I was fired. I was so happy. And I just waited till 9 o'clock till I called my agent and said, I'm gonna get paid here, right? Yeah, you're gonna get paid, don't worry, you're gonna get paid. They wanted me to go to Detroit with this thing, in Chicago, and it was really good money for 2 days' work, so I was very happy. And I didn't tank it, I did my best, so, yeah. But he's a nice guy. Anybody else, anything? Tom Detweiler.
What was it like working with Howard Stern?
Howard was great. He is, I have not worked with him in a while. So, I mean, he was really rich then. Now he's like crazy. So, but he was always great. I tell this story. I worked with some icons, like across, like I did the Johnny Carson show with the Groundlings way back then. I remember like they said, whatever you do, don't look at Johnny. And really don't talk to him. Don't say anything like, hey, Johnny, how's it going? Like, don't do that. And then I had worked with Jay Leno, incredibly nice guy. So I was afraid, like Howard, like working with him, like, what's this guy gonna be like? Could not have been nicer, open. I said, can I ask you some questions about the show? Absolutely, because I was a big fan. And yeah, we really hit it off. He was great. I gotta say this, and I'm not making this up. He's as good as reading a script and giving notes as anybody I've ever gotten notes from. Like I don't know how he did it. Like for a guy who is a radio guy, I don't know how he did it. But he would look at a script and give really great notes. Like change the show notes that made perfect sense. So he was always great, always really good to me and professional and great. Yeah, good guy too. I mean, yeah, there's one. Yeah.
Tim, you got anything new coming up, or are you retiring?
I'm writing. I sort of got into animation now, late in life, because in animation they don't care how old you are. So I've been doing some animated writing. The thing at Fox didn't go, but it kind of got me jazzed about it. And now I'm currently writing one for a company out of Ireland. I became an Irish citizen because my sister did all the paperwork. and so I did, yeah, okay, and then I got a passport, so I'm able to work in the EU. And I like it. I like writing animation. It's fun. I never did it till late in life, and they seem to like me, so that's what I'm working on. Yeah. But I also just worked on the show Sprung. I don't know if you show, it's a great show that should have gotten more play. It's on Amazon and made for freebie. We shot it during COVID, then it aired a year later. It's a really great, wonderful show. The guy I worked for a lot over the years is a guy named Greg Garcia. Wonderful guy. He did My Name is Earl and Raising Hope and this show, The Sprung, Sprung, we shot in Pittsburgh, and I really recommend it. It's 10 episodes, really funny, over before you know it, great stuff.
So how is it like playing a character of yourself on My Name is Earl?
One of my favorite things to do. That's a funny Greg Garcia story. So we did an episode in My Name is Earl where they did a kids beauty pageant, you know, like a little girl beauty pageant episode. And Greg, this was like episode 2 maybe. And I had just finished Son of the Beach, but I saw the pilot of Earl and I said, if you got a spot on the staff, I'd love to write for this show. So now it's like episode 2 and the baby pageant is coming up and he said, hey, I need like kind of a C-list celebrity to play this part of the host at the pageant. And I said, let me think. And he said, no, I want you. And that sort of started, and then I just kept going with it. I made him drunk, and I had him live in the, and I made him wear the Son of the Beach uniform. And it was owned by, both shows were owned by Fox, so we could do it. And I really I loved doing that. It was so much fun, and Greg just let me go playing a drunk. And the reason why I wanted to wear the uniform, this is another show business story about today. Some of you remember the show The Big Valley? Remember the show The Big Valley, Barbara Stanwyck? So Lee Majors, who was a great guy, he's still alive, he's a great guy. He did the last 3 episodes of Son of the Beach. So I'm just pumping him with questions about Barbara Stanwyck and I said, what about Nick Barkley? Remember Nick Barkley used to wear black gloves, everything was black hat, black neckerchief, black gloves, he was the tough guy of the family. And I said, what was that guy like? He said, well, that guy was weird. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you finish work on Friday and you hand the costume back. Nick Barkley, or whatever his name was, would keep the costume and drive around LA on Saturdays in a convertible. Like he'd do his errands, he'd go to the bank, pick up the dry cleaning, whatever it was, in his Big Valley outfit. And I thought that was so crazy and funny. And I said, Greg, can I wear the Son of the Beach out like I'm Nick Barkley? And that's how that whole thing happened. So that was really fun to play that part. Yeah, Dave.
They made a mistake. They gave me a microphone.
That's a big mistake, Tom.
Strangers in the night.
Have you had any interaction with Jarl Moan through the years?
We have. Now, I don't know if people know who Jarl Moan is. Jarl Moan is an unbelievable Doylestown story. And Dave, chime in if you want to. He grew up very poor in town. He talks about this now. He didn't for years. He talked about it. He and Pat were in the same class, Tom, and he was like Howard Stern, and they became very good friends. And I used to talk to each one about the other. So he was obsessed with radio, Jarl was. And at age 16, he hitchhiked down to Florida, and back then you used to get a broadcast license. You had to get a radio license in order to be a DJ. And he hitchhiked at 16 to Florida, gets his license, come back. And he gets on WBUX. And he changed his name to Lovable Lee Masters. And he became a pretty successful DJ. Then he became Jerry Masters for a moment, then back to Lee Masters. But then he started using his money to buy radio stations. Long story short, he became wildly, wildly successful. He started the E! Channel, he ran MTV, and then he got into sort of venture capital investing in things like, StubHub and Ticketmaster and all these companies that have just killed it. But he's really a great Doylestown story because the kid was, came from really nothing and cajillionaire, but also an incredibly talented guy at the same time.
Yeah, at one point he was in
think the CEO of NPR Radio.
Yes, that was sort of a volunteer job. That was his payback to radio.
Well, I'll tell you what, when we were kids, we had a band, we played sock dance.
Yeah.
And for you kids, anyway, Yorl said, we're like 14, 15, he goes, I want to be a lead singer. So we bring him in, and my brother Kirk and my and we rehearse for a couple of weeks. We go to the sock dance, and we start the song, and we're really going. No vocals. When you look around, Yorl had stage fright. Now he talks to 20, 30,000 people at a time with no problem. But back then, our little gag, Yorl and I, we had to sit him down in a corner and go on without him.
That's funny. That's similar to Howard Stern, and Howard would tell you that. Like, he's a really nice guy, but he's a shy guy. But he said, I get the microphone in front of me, and it becomes somebody else. And sort of Jarl had that radio fantasy thing. Yeah, great Doylestown story. Yeah.
Any funny stories or moments from your nightstand with Dick Dietrick days?
Nightstand with Dick Dietrick was the first show that I sold myself. Like, I was the co-creator of the show. And that was a big moment. This is a funny story. So this is now 94, and somehow we managed to sell this show. And if you don't know, there are a bunch of episodes on YouTube, and it was a spoof of daytime talk. You know, when Springer and Richard Day and all these shows were everywhere, Jenny Jones. Dick Dietrick was this spoof of those shows. And somehow we sold it in the syndication market to start. And it was a crazy way the show sold. That's too long of a story. But I remember one of my favorite moments was, it's for me, for a kid from Doylestown, when somebody comes up to you and says, you got your show on TV. It was just, wow, this is quite a moment. And I called my wife and I said, it's gonna be on TV, like, this is crazy. And so I leave the convention, it's the NAPD convention, where now I'm by myself, and I'm walking across Las Vegas Boulevard. I think I was staying, if you know Vegas, like at the Mirage. I'm walking the street. It's a rainstorm. It's a pouring rainstorm. So this is big TV guy, now he's got his own show, he's crossing. And suddenly in Las Vegas, the roads can fill up really quickly. So now I'm walking in a foot of water. I don't have an umbrella. I'm wearing a toupee from Dick Dietrick. That starts kind of melting now and falling in front of my face. And I'm trudging through the rain. I don't have a raincoat, anything. Anyway, I just thought I love that kind of stuff where it's like, yeah, I'm Mr. TV, all right? Got my own show. No, the toupee's down on my face, and I'm trying to make it across Las Vegas Boulevard. So that's a funny nightstand memory. But thanks I know you're a fan of that show, and thank you. So, anybody who could, there's one more.
Tim, I don't know if you remember me. My name's Bill Buckman. I've been since 1957, and we hung out in the neighborhood. You and your brother, Pat.
Yeah.
And I knew your mom and dad, of course, and your mom interviewed me in the mid-'80s at Punky's when I was president of the Doylestown JCs.
That makes perfect sense that she would have you on.
JCs and the Doylestown Lions Club, we combined our resources, and we had the Heart of Bucks Auto Show.
Yeah, keep going. I think I remember this.
At War Memorial Field. And then eventually it became the Dawn to Dusk, which they have now in July.
Okay.
But anyway, when you mentioned about the go-karts, I was one of the kids that made that, and we used to go down East Hill.
Oh, yes. Right. You were Johnny Danger, man.
It was.
That was crazy.
We were kids, right?
Yeah, you do stupid stuff. Yeah.
Anyway, I remember hearing a rumor about you and your brother who took the Rambler to Atco Speedway.
Pat did. You might have been in the car. Yes.
I heard the story, but why don't you tell what you...
You tell it. I don't remember that well. I do remember them going. It was that Rambler I showed you that we painted that he took to Woodstock. I guess after that he decided to enter it in a race. I think this is the story. So I think this is it. So somehow they got in the race. And meanwhile, people are driving 120 miles an hour, and he's in a Rambler going 40 with the 3-speed on the column. But the big joke was, when they crossed the finish line, the back went down, and we threw out a parachute. Is that it? Thank you for remembering that, because I wouldn't have. I didn't throw it out. I think Jim Coffin threw it out the back in a 64 Rambler. Yeah. One more. Anybody? We good? We good? Oh, there's one in the back.
First off, I want to thank you, Tim, for coming and sharing your stories with us.
My pleasure. I really wanted, I mean, it was Michael McConish, who, that podcast, if you haven't listened, it's really fun. And he's so good and talented, and he's another great Doylestown story.
My question is, how did you get your first break in Hollywood?
Well, a guy I went to GA with, a good friend of mine still today, his dad, I kind of created it myself. I was living in New York, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know what to do. I knew I didn't want to be in New York. I always wanted to be in TV. And I knew somehow I got to get to Los Angeles. And my friend Josh, his dad had gone to college with this guy, Grant Tinker, who went on to become NBC, but at the time, he was Mary Tyler Moore's husband. I didn't know what I was doing. I had no idea. And I had done a play in Boston in school called Moon Children, and I thought it would be a good idea for a TV show. It was kids living off campus in the 60s, and Happy Days was on, there was the 50s, and I thought, I'll write a letter to him and say I want to do this. And so I sent it to a bunch of people, never thinking anything would happen. Then all of a sudden I get a call, and this guy says, hello, I'm Bruce Paltrow, who was Gwyneth Paltrow's father. I had no idea who he was. And my apartment rings on 21st Street, my friend Frank knows. It's like, yeah, and Grant Tinker wants you to read for this TV series. Like, what? Is this a prank? No, he wants you to read for the TV. So I go up there, and it was the show St. Elsewhere. And it was the part Howie Mandel eventually got. And I read for Bruce Paltrow, and he said, you know, you're pretty good. You should move to LA. There's more work there. And I had just gotten an apartment. That's hard, was really hard in New York then, and I had a good bartending job. I was like, then literally like 2 weeks after that, Grant Tinker called. And so it was just crazy that somebody that big, and I just knew, I said, if I don't, I gotta go. So that got me out there. And then, do we still have time? I'll tell one more. Okay, so that got me out there. And I got a job tending bar at the Troubadour, which is the big rock club, at one of the big rock clubs there. And I'm reading about the Groundlings. And when I moved out there, I didn't know anybody. I knew one guy who was a cocaine dealer. That was never my thing, like never ever my thing. But I had worked up in East Hampton in the summer in a bar, and he was a coke dealer. And he moved out there. I didn't know anybody. It was like, hey, his name was Roland. Hey, Roland, how you? So it was somebody to hang out with. And I never got involved with it, couldn't care less, but it was at least somebody to hang out with. So I'm working Troubadour, and I read about the Groundlings. And it's like, oh my God, I think this is, because Saturday Night Live and SCTV, this sounds like what I want to do. So I buy a ticket for the Groundlings. I go to the Groundlings show, and it was just crazy. It was my sort of religious experience that night, because it was Paul Rubens as Pee Wee Herman, it was Phil Hartman as Chick Hazard, Edie McClurg, who was Mrs. Marv on Letterman, and the principal secretary in Ferris Bueller. It was just crazy. I was just sort of blown away. And Roland, the coke dealer, had said, hey, come to this party afterwards. I said, I'm going to the Groundlings. He said, we'll come afterwards. So I go to the party, and who is there but Phil Hartman? And I said, oh my God, I just saw your show. It's just crazy. It was just so good. And Phil, you know, had that voice, like, yeah, thanks a lot. And I said, how do you do that? And he said, well, you take a class. He said, I think there's a class starting Monday. I said, I think. And back then, I don't know if you did, but I always carried around a little address book. And he had the number, and he said, here, call this number tomorrow. It's a guy named Tom Maxwell. Call him on a Sunday. And I called Tom Maxwell, and Tom Maxwell said, sign up for the class. And all he said was, bring cash. And that's what I did. So that's sort of what I always consider the Groundlings as my big breaking point, where I got jobs after that, but the Groundlings I sort of made my own, and that's how I found the Groundlings, through Phil Hartman and cocaine. We good? Yeah. Thank you. This is really fun. Thank you.
So we like to thank Tim for his funny stories and remembrances of Doylestown. And so as a gift, we have something. We know that you have...
It's cocaine.
It's cocaine. Lots of it. So we know you have a connection to Connie's Cross Keys. So as a thank you, we have a gift basket. But in that basket, there are 2 brandy glasses from Conti's from years ago.
I forgot to say something about Walter Connie, and Joe knows this. Like, that moment of getting fired really taught me a lesson about work, and I know Joe knows this. And I wrote Walter, this is years back, and thanked him for that, because it really was a great lesson. So anyway, thank you for this. This is great.
So we hope that they get used often and more memories get created. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.